Now we're going to go from data to action and how City Simulator drives smarter investments. So next we're going to hear from Adam Howell and Stephen Bourne. They're with AtkinsRealis, and they will be demonstrating how technology can drive resiliency investments. So at this time, I would ask Adam and Stephen to come up. And welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Beautiful. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Jackie and David, for connecting us with you all today. A quick background. My name is Adam Howell. I work for AtkinsRealis along with my colleague Stephen Bourne here. And AtkinsRealis is an engineering design firm who is partnering with an organization called the National League of Cities. And we had the opportunity to partner with them over the past several years and publish an article that caught David and Jackie's eye using the information we're going to talk to you today about. We've been working hard over the past couple of months to develop a demo of looking at impacts to your local geography. But before we do that, I want to dive in to a quick and brief overview of what we do as a company and how we can help you start these conversations based on what we've already talked about today. So we are an international company, but building resilience here knows no boundaries. And so while we do have several thousand here that work in the United States with 2 local offices in the Los Angeles metro area, we rely on expertise from our counterparts from across the world. And we bring those expertise points to every project we work on as best we can. And we want to help discuss how we work with partners, including many of you that could be in this room, on how to start that resilience journey. We've heard from other speakers today to change the conversation, how to do business differently, and how to engage in the next steps to do planning differently. And so we want to really focus on looking at how we can help identify those resilient assets, look at your services and functions, and then truly turn that into developing thriving communities to what they are today and beyond, so that they are successful places for all those to live, work, and play. This slide is very busy. I do not want you to read it entirely, but this is our entire approach and framework for how we would develop resiliency across interdependent elements that impact and service everyday functions through your cities and agencies. And we are here to talk about the beginning stages of how to anticipate, avoid, and adapt and mitigate. But there are many steps after that in terms of how to withstand and recover. And we want to use these digital tools to help introduce new conversation points. And with that, I want to introduce Stephen Bourne, who will go through some elements that we've been working on specifically for you today. Steve?
Thank you. Thanks, Adam. I'm going to talk about City Simulator. About 2011, 2012 at our company, we were challenged to come up with a way to help our clients, particularly mid-sized cities, with improving their resilience, understanding how resilient they are, and working out ways to improve it. So we sort of, the best ideas come from going to the bar and having beer and drawing things on the back of napkins. This is what we drew. Essentially the question we said we really needed to answer was, how do you measure resilience? Some of the light bulb moments were, well, maybe we don't want to actually measure resilience. Resilience isn't on the y-axis there. It's actually community health and prosperity. We want to measure how well is a community doing and what are the challenges to it doing better. Next thought was we need to think about the long term. That's a 40-year timeline there. You'll note that the green line, the resilient city, has a higher slope. It's improving better in terms of its prosperity than the unresilient one. Our thought behind that was that it's the old saying, what is measured is managed. A resilient city is paying attention to itself and trying to improve, and so it does. when a disaster occurs, the resilient city is going to take a hit just like the unresilient one, but the hit will be less because it's been thinking about itself and planning for those kind of events. But then the real big difference is what happens after. Both cities will take some time to recover, but the resilient city is back on its feet almost immediately. The unresilient one is 20 years later, it's just getting back to where it was. And this is entirely realistic. Think about a place like Puerto Rico that was hit with, it was in the middle of an economic disaster and got hit by 2 large hurricanes in 2017. It's on that sort of journey right now to get back to where it was. So we decided, yes, let's build a tool like this. The kind of requirements we wrote for our tool, we wanted it to integrate systems. Wally mentioned silos earlier. At a big engineering firm like Atkins, we're in analytical silos. If you're a flood modeler, you know how to model floods, better than anybody in the world, but you have no idea how a travel model works. Similarly, you don't know how economics models work and so on. We said, let's make one model that integrates all that together and get rid of all of the analytical silos. Business as usual, as well as disasters. So I mentioned that. Let's include climate change in this tool. Let's look at long timelines. We're very asset management focused, so we wanted to know, if you're spending $10 million on a new asset, a new major, piece of transportation infrastructure, is it actually worth it? Does it live the lifespan that you're planning? Let's allow for adaptation and mitigation. We talked a lot about solutions this morning. Let's put them into this system and see how well they're going to do before we put the money into actually implementing them. And then finally, let's be able to conduct this whole thing in a planning context. So 6 months to 12 months planning level budgets. It shouldn't take years of modeling to get to an answer with a tool like this. What we actually built was a city simulator. Essentially we build a digital twin of your community, and then we can evolve it into the future. Usually we go from 2020 to 2100, and the simulation is extraordinarily detailed. We're simulating buildings being built, populations growing, economies growing. It's an agent-based tool. What that means is if you have 1 million people, we have 1 million avatars in our model moving around and doing things, and we're measuring how much they're getting disrupted in their day-to-day lives. We measure things like carbon footprint, impacts to natural systems. The center loop in there, that runs sort of once a day, and it brings in the climate change through global climate models. We use those to predict daily rain, wind, sea level, all those different variables. And on any given day, we're asking, did a disaster occur today? If it does, we can then measure, what gets impacted because we have this digital twin. So we can understand what buildings, what roads, who's getting disrupted, where are they getting disrupted, and how long is it going to take to recover. As we were doing this simulation, we were agreeing on, or measuring several different metrics. They fall into this triple bottom line of economy, people, and environment. It's a very stakeholder-based process, so which metrics we measure is actually a decision of the stakeholders. But we present them with a very long menu. Some examples here are things like trips disrupted. That's been a very number one metric that we measure is, into the future, how many people are going to get disrupted from going to work or going to school or whatever. That's a very people-focused, life-focused metric that people have a lot of interest in. Economy too, dollar signs, everybody wants to know that. So productivity, how much is lost because of future climate change, what damage happens to buildings and people's properties, how much energy is consumed, what's the heat exposure. All these different metrics can be measured with this tool. Okay, so I was presented a challenge when we agreed to do this presentation. I was basically told you have 3 weeks to model South Bay. So off I went. one of the first things we actually do is we ask questions. Actually, we get stakeholders to ask questions. What do we want to simulate here? The three that we agreed on were future impacts to property, future impacts on traffic, and how can we adapt to challenges that we find. This is, a representation of the digital twin we built. This is 119,000 buildings. I was told to merge 4 different cities together and then pull all the information from them. Commercial here is red buildings, yellow is residential. There's an average dwelling cost of $803,000, 324,000 people, 306,000 jobs in this digital twin. From a transportation perspective, there's about 1,600 miles of road that we included. And then this one took me back. 270,000 trips a day is the highest AADT on this map. 270,000 trips a day is ranked second in the nation, and it's highway, it's I-405. I come from Atlanta, and that took me back. And if anyone's ever been to Atlanta, you know about the traffic in Atlanta. So that was amazing. In terms of flood, we then looked at some of the disasters and what's the potential risk. There is a professor, Professor Sanders at UCI, who recently did a study that was published in Nature. One of the benefits of City Simulator is we can pull in data like this from the latest research and use it in our assessments. What Professor Sanders looked at was riverine flood, pluvial flood, and coastal flood. What do those mean? Usually, if you're talking about FEMA, there's FEMA flood maps. That's a river gets full and overtops its banks. That's pretty much the only thing that's really considered in those kind of studies. Pluvial flooding is heavy rain that just sort of piles up, doesn't make it to a river, and causes damage. That can be as much as 40% of the flood risk, and it's not typically considered. Coastal flooding, that's things like storm surge, sea level rise, and so on. This study incorporated all of that into one flood model, and so you can see where the risk areas are. What we did, he did it for just contemporaneous, like right now, this is the flood risk. In the future, this is projected to grow because of changing climate, intensifying storms, and so on. Projected rain, we have a whole process called downscaling. The upper curves up there, those are from global climate models. There's about 25 of them, and they all project rainfall in the area on a monthly time step. We then take historical data, that's what's on the left here, and blend the two together and get the curves on the right. And so what you can see is if you look at the series of curves that are smooth there, that's an estimate of the 100-year storm as we move into the future. And so you can see the projection there is that it's increasing steadily. I think it goes up by about 40% by the year 2100 in this area. There's some really interesting projections about rainfall here. There's projections that the extremes are going to stay high and get higher, but there's going to be longer droughts in this area. So you're going to move from an already kind of risky situation where you do get heavy rainfalls in this area and long periods of no rain. That'll actually intensify into the future. In terms of temperatures, this is from Climate Explorer, and the projection. I always use them. They do really nice charts. The projection is that if you look at the scenario in the global climate models of little control of greenhouse gases, the number of days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit per annum goes from about 50 right now in this area to 110 by the year 2100. If you look at the heavily controlled GHG scenario, you're still getting an increase, but it's going to 80 instead of 110. So no matter how you cut it, temperatures are going to increase quite significantly in the future. This is maybe the most interesting part of the study, projected winds. So Santa Ana winds, those are the real problem around here in terms of wildfire. Another professor, Guzman Morales at UCSD, did a study, and they used 8 different global climate models and looked at what would the impact be to the Santa Ana winds specifically in the future. The interesting thing is that it's projected to have less activity in the future than it does right now. Almost every study I've ever done of climate change, there's always that sort of silver lining conclusion that you don't expect. This is the one for this study. So it's essentially saying, if you look at the curve on the bottom left there, in the center, that's peak Santa Ana territory. And then you'll note that everything is negative on that chart. So it's going down from where it is today. And on the shoulders there in October, April, it's going down much more significantly than the peak winds. The general conclusion is that at least this study says that there will be a drop across the board in terms of wind intensity, which is good news. But you still will have events with high intense winds. So those you'll need to watch out for them. They just won't happen as often. And there's a projection that the season will actually move later in the year than it is right now. We took that information and generated, projected winds from 2020 to 2100. So this is what's feeding our models. And you can see it has a downward trend reflecting that projection. We simulated wildfire in this study. What we do is we put a grid over the whole South Bay, grid cells that are about 100 meter by 100 meter. And then we project the soil moisture content in those grid cells. Fires start with ignitions. Ignitions happen when soil is dry and there's no moisture. So essentially we take the temperatures and the winds and the rainfall that comes out of these global climate models and run these water budgets on every grid cell. And as the grid cells get drier and drier, ignitions, we use a random number generator to say probabilistically, okay, a fire is likely to happen in this grid cell. When it happens, we then use methods that they use at the U.S. Forestry Service called land fire, which is a fire behavior model. And that works out for us using land use, like what's actually on the ground, what vegetation is on the ground, how much will the fire spread, how quickly will it spread, and how long does it take to suppress. And so we can actually simulate an entire wildfire occurring and measure how much it damages property, how much it impedes travel, and so on through this model. This was also pretty interesting. If you look up at the northwest there, that is the Palisades fire. And if you look up at the northeast, that is the Eaton fire. That's their perimeters. And then if you look at the area that we studied down in the bottom left, the South Bay area, that's the area that we studied. So, you can tell there's a difference, right? Our study's gray, urban and developed area. Those areas were shrubs, grasslands, and so on. So we expect a difference in terms of the fire response here. Essentially, there's no fuel for a fire in our area. I can zoom in here. So this is a zoom in of the area. You can see the boundary in the cyan color there. There's very little in here to burn, at least according to the Forestry Service. So you might call this another silver lining too. If we zoom in though, this is that area in the Victoria Golf Course. That's like one of the few areas that actually had something to burn in that map. That's a 30 meter by 30 meter grid cell. That's the size that this model works at. And if you just go a little bit east from there, you can see the golf course on the left here. The houses, that's a 30 meter grid cell. So, what we think is that, okay, if we just run this fire model with this gray area as our background, there isn't going to be a fire. It'll get hot, but it won't actually grow, even if there is ignition. We think adding, the density of houses and all of that material into the model actually helps to understand really in an urban area like this, there's more fire potential than the fire models are really saying. And I think we saw that in the Palisades fire and the Eden fire. That fire spread, even though there's less burnable vegetation than you would expect a fire of that size to actually consume. In terms of flood simulation, we kind of do this like the FEMA modelers do it. Essentially, we're looking for water reaching the first floor elevation of each building. After it reaches that elevation, water's in your house and it starts doing real damage. And so we take what is that depth of flood that we get, and we put it up on this curve right here, which compares flood depth in a house to the percent of the replacement cost of the house that is the damage that's caused. So if your replacement cost for your house, if you knock down your house and built it again and it costs you $100,000, if this curve is saying 20%, then you get $20,000 in damage for a particular flood. So we do this with every building in the landscape and can work out how much it's going to cost how much damage is going to be caused. We also do disruption of travel. So there's 3 different types here. On the left, we're talking about rivers overtopping their banks. A foot of water over a road, which might have a culvert. If that culvert gets blocked, there's so much power on that road, it wipes out the entire road. And typically, Caltrans will be spending 180 days getting that road back in working order. That's a lot of disruption for people who take that road every day. Tide, not a concern here, but I just wanted to say, in this model, we do tide as well. Sea levels are rising and causing that kind of situation on a daily basis. So that's also disruption. And then another one we didn't do, but we could do is flushing. As temperatures get higher, they're actually melting asphalt on a daily basis. As cars roll over the asphalt, they pull the aggregate out of the asphalt and make the road slick and unsafe, and that has to be controlled. So that's counted as disruption as well. Getting into the findings, the impact on property, there are, again, 119,000 buildings, but we had about 4,000 that saw some sort of flooding above first floor elevation in our initial model here. In 2070, that went up above 4,000, and then in 2100, it's getting close to 5,000. So the intensifying storms are increasing the size of the floodplains essentially, and much more flooding is occurring. The cost of that flooding, that's down the bottom here, and it goes from about 200 million up to just over 500 million as you go into the future. And that's because the houses that were originally flooding are now flooding much more than they used to, and you're adding more houses to the picture as well in terms of the damage that's occurring. Looking at this in a little detail, Dominguez Hill Southwest, you can see where the flooding is occurring here. The red picture, the red buildings, that's more than 2 feet of flooding in each building. And they're orange and yellow as well, that's lesser flooding. Here's another one, East Dominguez Street. You can see just the area in the center of the map that had some significant flooding as well. And then down here by Torrance Municipal Airport, there's also some flooding, and you can see the floodplain as well. And then over there, what is that area? Arlington Avenue, there was some flooding there as well. Impacts on travel. Typically, we would have the average annual daily trips of all of these roads, and so we can estimate the disrupted trips that are happening. This is that same area, Dominguez Hills Southwest, and then going along the highway here. This is where we saw the most significant highway flooding, and any trips that are happening here are getting disrupted on a regular basis. Similarly, for the airport, these seem to really be the hot spots in the area that we studied. In terms of wildfire, as I mentioned, there wasn't a whole lot of fuel that we had to cause fires that would last for a long time. So we saw limited activity and impact due to high urbanization. We inflated the probabilities for high density areas, but that didn't really cause that much of an increase in the amount of fires that we observed. The fire simply just didn't have things to burn. We recommend in the future, if we're going to do this, and do a real study with it, getting land cover that's much higher resolution. Like the grid cells we were looking at were 30 meter by 30 meter. That's not really enough to really understand, what's happening on the ground. You have to get right down to the level of the things that are burning. So increasing that resolution would really help in the future. We tried some adaptation actions, the two on the left, elevating buildings and the buyout programs. These are really from our FEMA playbook. Elevating buildings, it's what you might think, it's just elevate the entire structure if it's a structure that's known to flood. The return on investment you get out of that, you basically measure it by measuring how much damage would have happened if you didn't elevate it, subtract from how much if you did, and then divide that by the cost of elevating it. The other option, buyout programs, so in these, for buildings that flood frequently, you just buy the building and turn it into a stormwater park or something like that, and avoid the damage altogether. And then this other one, which we haven't done before, this study, we got very excited about this study because we're trying a lot of new things. Anticipatory sprinkler systems. Let's get into that. Has anyone ever seen this picture? Wildfire to occur and someone forgot to turn off their sprinklers and it saved their house? Well, I'm an engineer. I said, okay, that doesn't sound right. So I looked it up a lot, and after consulting Snopes and sites like that, what I found was they did do that, but the volunteer firefighters came to this house right before the fire came through and wet the entire thing down with water. That's really probably what saved it. But working on the concept that if you do sprinkle heavily and in a more robust way, maybe you can actually make a difference. We tried that as an adaptation action as well. Maybe the most interesting result we got from this study was we tried 3 different scenarios, and this was really focused on structures and houses and flooding. We said, okay, let's look at what they normally do post-disaster. They'll go and fix a building, or they'll, that kind of thing. That costs the least to do because you're waiting for the disasters happening. You're only working on the houses that actually get damaged. But with that, you get an ROI, return on investment, of about 80%. Because you're letting a lot of things get damaged. You're not anticipating it all. We said, okay, let's try the other option, which is you have all the money in the world, right? So you just fix all the houses that you know could potentially flood. That, of course, costs $220 million for that area, making the return on investment much, much lower. You're just spending a lot, and there's a good chance that the damage won't actually happen. The third option, the proactive option, is the one where you find the houses, you rank them, and every year maybe you fix 2 or 3 and don't spend that much. That resulted in the only one that was more than 100% return on investment. So an interesting finding. All right, I'm going to finish it up here. This is just the beginning. Again, we did this in 3 weeks. Usually it's a year-long process to do these studies. What the conclusions I came up with is more data. It would make the assessment much more comprehensive. More study questions. I listed 3. We need, a serious list of study questions. And then finally, more adaptation actions. All the solutions that were mentioned this morning, we could try them in City Simulator and find out how effective they could potentially be. And that usually gives a lot of momentum for getting grants and bringing more money into the picture to try these things. So that's really the role that City Simulator can play. Adam?
Thank you, Steve. I realize we are in between, we're in between you and lunch, so I'm going to make this less than 30 seconds. This is a quick piece. These slides we made available to you on the COG's website after this presentation. Just here, a quick point to know, Steve made a point about getting grants to continue the conversation here locally and regionally. There are some resources on this slide that I encourage you to look into both at the national level, state, and regional level, but I encourage you to continue to build in your local conversations, coordinate with your local, regional, and state partners, but then also collaborate with private industry, which has been said time before us. And again, with that, I thank Jackie and the team here at the COG and all of those that have come before us for this opportunity to present. Please, I will turn it over to whoever is going to turn us to the next.
Okay, thank you, Steve and Adam. We appreciate you. And through this, we can see that it's clear that technology will continue to play a critical role in how cities plan for the future. So thank you guys again.